Welcome, everyone, to Third Thursdays with Tom and Tim. I'm Tim Nutt.
I'm Tom Dillard, and we're glad to have you with us. Tim and I have been interested in Arkansas studies for a long time. We are both historians who concentrate on Arkansas history, but we're also interested in the full spectrum of Arkansas studies, which would include literature for sure, and that's the subject of tonight's program. Tim, why don't you talk about the format and maybe questions and that sort of thing?
Sure. So 1 hour program, we always end at 8 o'clock, no matter where we are. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature located somewhere. It's probably in your toolbar somewhere. And we'll get to those at the end of the session tonight. And this show is all about Arkansas, any Arkansas history, Arkansas culture, Arkansas books, anything that has to do with Arkansas. Tom and I had this idea last year that we wanted to start this web show just to talk about Arkansas history and sort of promote its history and its authors and just everything really about Arkansas. So we're glad that you're here. We have a great guest tonight. And what's been going on with you? What have you been reading anything tonight or this week?
Well, you know, I do a column in Arkansas history, and that means I read constantly. Most of that is directed toward whatever my subject of my column is going to be. But I try to work in other things, and I try to make time for fiction, although I certainly don't keep up with things like I should. So I've been reading a lot lately. I've been working on the history of Halloween. And it has a long history in Arkansas.
It does have a long history. I have a presentation on Halloween coming up next week for AARP. So I'll put in a plug for that. But it's talking about Halloween, sort of scary stories, ghost stories in Arkansas and the region. Actually.
Well, there's a vast number of ghost story type publications. Judy Dockery and her husband, I can't remember his name right now. They did a series on Arkansas ghost stories. You know, they're just stories, but they're fun at this time of the year, particularly as we're thinking about Halloween and the supernatural.
I think interest in the supernatural and things like ghosts have become more popular than it was in the past. You know, you have the television shows about ghost hunters and things like that. And I think it's really generated interest in all things that are spooky and haunted and things like that. Of course, the Crescent Hotel up in Eureka Springs is supposedly haunted.
Yeah, there's a good deal of material in print about that hotel. But there's tons of other stories. Every community in the state has some sort of abandoned house or stories about somebody who, you know, drowned their children in a well or something like that. And many of them are, you know, just made up. But then what difference does it make? It's all supernatural anyhow.
Well, and there are some Arkansas novels set in Arkansas or written by Arkansas authors that have a ghost as a protagonist in it. Can you name one of them?
Well, we have to mention, you're trying to trick me, aren't you? We have to mention Kevin Brockmeyer's new book on ghost stories.
Right, that's true, Ghost Variations. And we actually had Kevin on a couple of months ago to talk about his new books. I was not thinking about that book, although that does fit. I was thinking of.
Well, what I wanted to say is for people who would like to hear that interview with Kevin Brockmeyer, it is now, these shows are now posted on YouTube, and Tim has really put effort into getting those edited and posted, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because I forgot to mention that earlier, that all these shows are recorded. And I do a little bit of editing and add in a title slide and everything, try to make them look as professional as possible within my limited skill set. And then they're uploaded to our YouTube channel, Third Thursdays with Tom and Tim. So you can just go to YouTube and search Third Thursdays, and all of the shows, or most of the shows that we've done, are up, and you can even download them if you want to, so you can share them, or you can share the link on them. So, well,
they're homemade in a way, but maybe we make up in fun what it lacks in slick production values or something.
That's
like
true.
that.
That's true. And I think this is it's a prime example of people making use of their time, good use of their time during a pandemic.
That's true.
Because we started this in January.
Yeah, the pandemic played a lot in our thinking about putting this show on, and I hope it's been of help to people. You might be surprised that we're doing another show on Arkansas literary subjects. We just did Kevin Brockmeyer not too long ago, but tonight we're going to talk about some authors that might not be, but some Arkansas authors that might not be too well known. I have 4 that I have picked out that I would like to share.
And I'm going to share our screen. So, and you're going to talk about Jack Butler here first. He's one of your, one of the authors that you enjoy.
Jack Butler, he hasn't published anything that I know of in a long time, but I really think Jiu-Jitsu for Christ is a really extraordinary novel. Now, Living in Little Rock with Miss Little Rock, that huge volume was, in my humble opinion, a mistake. It might have had something to do with Jack Butler not being a recognized writer today, but Jiu-Jitsu for Christ is extraordinary. And it's not just me. The book is just loaded with blurbs by important and interesting writers, and they spare nothing in praising the book. Farrell Sims, for example, Sams, who is a well-known Southern writer, says this is a strong book, a compelling book, and I resented having to put it down for the obligations of everyday living. There is ugliness in this book, and there is shimmering beauty in this book. There are lies in this book, and there are strong truths. In short, it is a portrayal of life as it really is. I loved it. And the same thing, Barry Hannah says the same thing, Donald Harrington, William Harrison, and it's not a well-known book, but I urge you to read Jiu-Jitsu for Christ if you're interested in getting to know Jack Butler.
It is a great book. No, tell people what it's about. I mean, just in a brief summary, the plot of it.
Well, I can't, I read this 20 years ago when it first came. It came out in I think it came out in 2000. No, 1986.
Yeah.
Wow, it's been around a long time. And I read it when it first came out. But it's about a young man who, Roger, who is, he wants to be a preacher, but he's best at jujitsu. But the interplay between jujitsu and fundamental Christianity is a wonderful approach to take in talking about Roger and all of the interesting things that he represents. It's just fun also. It's a fun read. And I think that's, of course, the most important thing of all.
I enjoyed it. You recommended it to me right after when I first met you in 1990. That was one of the books that you recommended that I read.
Really?
Yeah. And it really is a good book. And the devotion it's interesting because the main character, Roger, has this devotion to jiu-jitsu as he does to religion.
That's right.
And it's really an interesting book. And I think it's Jack Butler's best book, actually.
Oh yeah, by far, in my opinion. Although I don't claim, I did not finish Living in Little Rock with Miss Little Rock. It's a huge volume, and it takes some special attention and a certain frame of mind to deal with living in Little Rock with Miss Little Rock, and I apparently did not have it. But anyhow, I highly recommend him. Jack has a background he has a background, some training. I guess he has an MFA in writing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the details, but he's trained also as a mathematician. Mm-hmm. And he did statistical work for the state for a good number of years. I think he's living out west somewhere.
I think he lives in California now. He was at Hendrix for a while. He worked at Hendrix for a while, but he's a great author. I encourage people to check him out.
I'm taking too long here on these guys, and we're going to run out of time. But Ernie Dumas is one of my favorite writers, a journalist. He was with the Gazette for a whole career. And then he wrote as a reporter, but he also wrote editorials toward the end of his life. And Ernie has a special way with words. I think he's really good. Let me read. I was doing research recently on the history of murders in Arkansas, so I pulled this book out, and he has this quote in here about Orville Faubus's abuse and misuse of the state prison system. And he says, Faubus often bragged about the efficient prisons and the use of trustees instead of free world guards who had to be paid. It taught responsibility, and it also spared the taxpayers. A killer like Leslie Rutledge, an Independence County mountaineer who simultaneously shot down two brothers who were crossing his land, would be invited by the prison superintendent to bring his rifle when he reported to Cummins. So here is a convicted murderer being invited to bring his rifle with him to the state prison, because they want him, I guess, from the very beginning, they want him to be a trustee, which means some armed murderer looking over everybody. A killer like Leslie Rutledge, an Independence County mountaineer who simultaneously shot down two brothers who were crossing his land, and he would be invited to bring his rifle when he reported. Rutledge was made a long line rider. That's R-I-D-E-R. They rode around on horses, supervising prisoners who were set down for filching merchandise or writing hot checks until Faubus, a few weeks after taking office in 1955, commuted his sentence and sent him home. His granddaughter, by the same name, was elected Attorney General of Arkansas in 2014. I just love Ernie Dumas. Great guy. Well, there went a pile of books, but that's not the first time that's happened.
Well, and that's what you should never do with a pile of books.
That's right.
Especially when they're mine.
Well, these are not your books.
Well, some of them are.
One of them.
Two of them are. They might be yours now.
Maybe they're my Christmas gift.
Yes.
Fierce Solitude is a wonderful book of a biography. It's a biography of John Gould Fletcher by Ben Johnson. Ben was previously a historian, and I think he was also an administrator at SAU in Magnolia. Ben is one of the best historical writers I know of. I just don't know of anybody who's any better. He's intelligent, but his writing is really, really great. And he really gets at John Gould Fletcher. What made him tick, or what made him not tick, perhaps. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I was going to quote from it, but I think I won't. The last book I want to show you is an autobiography, Maxine Brown's Looking Back to See, a country music memoir. This is perhaps the best, this might be the best autobiography by an Arkansan that I've ever read. Maxine had a knack for telling stories. They weren't all happy at all. This is a very honest, brutally honest book. And she settles a lot of scores in this book. Maybe that's the wrong reason to write it, but boy, what an amazing story it tells. I love Maxine Brown. She loved me. I want to show your viewers her inscription on my copy of the book. You will notice that she wrote, "Tom Dillard, I love you." And then she gave it a big old smack. Maxine was unusual. She had a great sense of humor. I loved her, and I love her autobiography, Looking Back to See.
I loved Maxine too. She was a great woman, and she was unfiltered, and she told you exactly what she was thinking and where you could head in and where you could head out.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
and I loved meeting her. I was sort of starstruck when I first met her. Of course, she was a member of the Browns, the musical group from Sparkman.
And that's Jim Ed Brown and
Bonnie and Maxine
Brown and Maxine Brown.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book that was brought out by the U of A Press. I think it's one of their best.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it stays in print for a long time. It's really appealing.
And I think it's still one of their best sellers. I think it sells all the time. Just before we move on I'm going to mention a couple of my books, but our guest tonight, Steve Yates, mentioned that Jiu-Jitsu for Christ was reprinted by the University Press of Mississippi.
Oh, really?
So that's
the author is a Mississippian, and the book is set in Mississippi. So it's really great to have this news. I did not know it. So I can recommend that book with the realization that people can acquire it.
This is one of my favorite books. It's a hard subject to talk about. It's Boy Erased by Garrard Conley. And it's about, he grew up in a small town, north central Arkansas. And his autobiography is about gay conversion camp. When his parents found out that he was gay, they sent him to a gay conversion Christian camp in Memphis, and this is sort of his story about that. And it's a hard book to read, but it's also a really touching book as well. It was made into a movie a couple of years ago, starring Nicole Kidman as his mother. And
where is Connolly from? You recall?
It's a small town. I can't remember exactly where it is. Let me see if I can. I think it's somewhere around near Batesville, because he went to Lyon College.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just going to read just a brief quote from it, because I think that his the way he writes is really descriptive. When he finally fell asleep, his snoring was almost loud enough to shake the gilded picture frames lining the hallway just outside my bedroom. Years before, my mother had moved to an adjacent guest bedroom, saying she needed time away from the earthquake that was my sleeping father, from the whining bedspreads accompanying each inhalation. When I was very young, 7 or 8 years old, I would wake from scripture-inspired nightmares, blue cones of flame licking my feet, chasm after chasm opening up out of a blackness more felt than seen, and walk the hallway to my father's bedroom to stand at the edge of his bed and wish him awake. I thought he should have understood me without the need for words, that the current between us was so free-flowing and deep, he would have no choice but to wake up in that instant. So it's a really very powerful autobiography. Like, as I said, it's kind of hard to read sometimes, but it's really, really a good book.
It looks like that would make a good Christmas gift for somebody you know and occasionally work with.
That's true. That's true. I'll see if I'll take that under consideration. They tell me of a Home Daniel Black novelist. This is one of his books I have not read. I think you know a little bit about it. You read it, and it has a sort of a hard subject as well as part of the plot. But I think that Daniel Black is a great writer too. I think his words are really descriptive, and I think his words just really flow.
He is from Blackwell, which is in the Arkansas River Valley, up near Morrilton. I guess it's right at the line between
Conway and Pope, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, on the freeway. You'll see it as you go up the freeway toward Fort Smith.
Yeah.
This town was part of the development of African American immigration to Arkansas during the late 1800s. Blackville developed from that. Blackwell developed from the immigration, the large immigration of Black Americans from the Southeast to Arkansas and Oklahoma and some other places farther west, searching for a more livable environment.
Well, in the final book, I have not read it. This is brand new, and you might have heard about the author, Anaya Gray, who is, let me get this slide up. Her new book, Beasts of Prey, has just been published, and it was just announced a couple weeks ago that it's been it's going to be made into a Netflix movie. So that's exciting for an Arkansas author. She graduated from the University of Arkansas with a degree in political science and African American studies. So she's a Fulbright College alumna of
That's great.
Yeah. So it's exciting to have your debut novel made into a movie and just get all the buzz from it. It's about two Black teens. This is from the website. It centers on two Black teens who must venture into a magical jungle to hunt down a monster. Many of the story's fantastical elements were inspired by different regions of the African continent and by her directly lived experiences as an African American woman. It's got really rave reviews. Kirkus Reviews, which is used by libraries to purchase books, gave it a starred review, which means one of their highest reviews.
And she's a Little Rock.
She's from Little Rock. Yeah, she doesn't. I don't think she lives in Little Rock now, but she is originally from Little Rock. So,
well, that's great.
So, yeah, I'm excited for her and excited to see what happens with the book, and I'm excited to read the book. So, well, I'm also excited that we have Steve Yates here tonight. And Steve's going to be talking about his work and his novella, Sandy and Wayne, which is set in Arkansas. And why don't you tell folks a little bit about Steve's background, give us a little bit of information about his background.
Steve is from Missouri, Springfield. Springfield, for those who don't know Springfield is a good-sized city and is sort of the capital of the Missouri Ozarks, I guess you'd say. Steve was at the University of Arkansas Press for a time, back when I first knew of him. And then later he went to the University Press of Mississippi, where he has been for several years now. And he's not been just working at the press, he's been working on his own fiction. And we're glad to have you here tonight to talk about that, Steve. I wanted to, as part of my introduction, mention that his publications include Morgan's Quarry. Do you pronounce that? How do you pronounce that?
Oh, you nailed it.
Morgan's Quarry, Some Kind of Love stories, The Teeth of the Souls, Sandy and Wayne, a novella, and The Legend of Albino Farm. Steve, would you like to sort of give us a bit of background about how you came to be a writer of historical fiction?
Sure. First, I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. It feels a little bit like old home week when you brought Jack Butler up, and
yeah,
we had worked on his reprint of that novel, Jiu-Jitsu for Christ, at University Press of Mississippi, and I got to meet Jack. He came back to Jackson and gave a great reading there, and it's a very Jackson book. In fact, of all books about Jackson, Mississippi, that one's stellar because it ends with that awful Ross Barnett Ole Miss versus I don't remember who game there in the stadium in the state capitol, which is a little bit like when Arkansas makes the Razorbacks play in Little Rock, right? And, you know, that was the game where Ross Barnett said famously on national TV, "I love Mississippi." And afterwards, there was such, you know, riot and unhappiness. And Fierce Solitude, I got to work on Fierce Solitude when I was at University of Arkansas Press. And Ben
It's
Johnson,
been out for quite a while.
yeah, I was there quite a while ago. You're right. And Fierce Solitude was great. And Ben Johnson was just one of those ideal authors, you know, someone who not only knows the topic, but really gets excited about helping you get to the people who are going to read the book. And that's a good cover to cover book, because John Gould Fletcher, I have a feeling it's better to meet him in a biography than to have actually met him in person, because he really sounds like a depressive and persnickety fellow.
Well, he was. When I was in graduate school at the University of Arkansas back in the early 70s, one day John Gould Fletcher's name came up as several faculty members were sitting around talking. And there was a senior faculty member who'd been there a long, long time. And he remembered John Gould Fletcher being on the faculty up there. He taught some at Fayetteville, you know, a guest lecturer and that sort of thing. And this faculty member said that there had been a reception in the gymnasium, and Fulbright was there. Fulbright was president of the university, you know, for a while before he went to Congress. And Fletcher apparently had no use for Fulbright, but the story is that he pulled his hat off, threw it across the room when he was introduced to Fulbright. And then he said to Fulbright, "Excuse me, I have to go retrieve my hat." So, you know, yeah, that's not in the book, by the way, but there's plenty in the book to substantiate that John Gould Fletcher would not be the kind of guy you would want your daughter to bring home as a marriage pet.
Yeah, but it was just lovely to see both of those and think about those authors again. I hadn't in a while. But your question that I've dodged here for a minute, how did I come to write historical fiction? I've come to believe that pretty much all good fiction is like history, in that it is set in the past unless it's science fiction projected into the future. And you know, if you think about the great novels, like The Great Gatsby, well, it was published 3 or 4 years after the events that are in the book. If you think about just so many books like The Red Badge of Courage. Think how far removed that was from a war that the author never ever participated in. So fiction is a kind of slow history. It's also a kind of history that allows both the reader and the writer to get into interstices. Ooh, that's a tough word to say at 7:30 p.m. Of the documents, right? We all can go through wills, we can go through court cases, we can go through the things that historians do to piece together what happened to people and how they felt about things. But we know that there's so much drama too outside of that. That the letter that someone wrote to someone, you know, that may not at all be how they felt. That may be their understanding of, well, I bet this is going to be in Tim Nutt's archive someday, so I really better polish. But I you know, the very first story where I really thought I learned a lot, that I published when I was at University of Arkansas in the MFA program, was a challenge. I'd overheard this while working at the Springfield News Leader, a Gannett paper here in town. A late night janitor was was just a delight to listen to. And he was down there in the sports department as we were putting the paper to bed at about 2 in the morning or something. And there had been a shooting in town that was quite grisly. And suddenly he says to me, you ever seen anybody with their head blowed off? And I thought, well, I'm definitely going to tell him, no, tell me all about this. And of course, the story flowed from that was just extraordinary. And it was about his father, grandfather. His grandfather had been a cow doctor, someone that we would call now a large animal veterinarian. But back then there was no licensure for that. And so the cow doctor, finding himself squeezed out by a licensed veterinarian, took a job at a mortuary. And a boy who'd been run over and drugged by a train had come to the mortuary. And in the time of this man's life, I've researched and found that, my gracious, mortuary science didn't have licensure all over the Ozarks and in Arkansas and Missouri. So this would have been really ground floor of change, where licensure and lobbyists were coming in and things like that. Anyway, I thought, what a challenge. What if I wrote about that man's night? The cow doctor, according to this janitor, his grandfather, volunteered to try to put this boy back together to have an open casket funeral. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is such a story about a writing. And how can I? I don't know anything about 1906. I don't know anything about mortuary science. And I thought, well, I know how to read books. I know how to go to the library. I know how to look things up. And I just started digging and digging. And it really taught me, the doing taught me everything.
Well, it's clear you do a lot of research, and of course that makes the writing not only more interesting in that it's based on reality or some sort of precedent. You do your research pretty deeply before you go into some of these things. Do you ever take any of those discoveries and write them up as nonfiction? Have you published nonfiction?
Well, I was a sports writer from early high school to all the way through the end of my college at Missouri State, what was then SMS, Southwest Missouri State. So I guess that's nonfiction, sports writing. And a little bit after that, I've written some essays, but not much. I mean, nothing like what you've written, Tom. And I was going back through Arkansas's list to say, now, did I get a chance to work on Tom's book? But no, I wasn't around for Statesmen and Scoundrels, so I wish I would have been. But no, I don't. I haven't written much nonfiction. And maybe one day I might. If I find myself with a set of research that says this would make a good nonfiction essay, I know it's missing something that's going to keep me writing, and that's the drama, the human conflict, the heart in conflict with itself and the world, as Faulkner always talked about. So maybe one day I'll come back to that, but just set it aside and come on.
Now you mentioned your research that you do, and I read on the I think it was maybe in the acknowledgement section of Sandy and Wayne, which is set on during the construction of I-540, now I-49, that you spent 3 summers with the State Highway Department doing research for this book. I'd love to hear about that.
Okay, well, now that the highway department might disagree with you about what I was supposed to be doing out there. I came to Arkansas from, I had been born in Springfield, Missouri, and lived in the same house for 21 years. And then I got the chance to go to the MFA program in Arkansas. So I had never moved. And I felt like moving from Springfield, Missouri to Fayetteville, which is only 2.5 hours, was tremendously traumatic. I hated it. I hated every bit of it. And I thought, well, what am I going to do during the summer down here? They don't pay me anything to be in the MFA program, hardly. What am I going to do? So I started applying for jobs, and I applied for all sorts of stuff. And I did apply at the Arkansas Highway and Transportation Department because I thought, well, wouldn't that be great? I'll be out there, you know, with a wheelbarrow or a mower, and I'll get all tan and buff, and it'll just be the best way to spend the summer. And so I got a call, and they said, well, come to the Springdale office and interview. I thought, oh my goodness, great. So I drove there, and I had this interview with two wonderful people, and it was just going superbly. And I thought, they're going to hire me. This is fantastic. And I said, well, what would I be doing on Monday? This is exciting. And they said, oh, you'll be surveying. And I said, oh my God. So I went to the University of Arkansas Library, and I checked out 4 books about surveying, and 1 or 2 of them at least were sort of surveying for dummies. And by that Monday, I at least got to the chapter about how to hold a flag in traffic, and that got me on. Out there holding a flag, stopping people. But I loved it. And each of those summers, they hired me back, and it was very good pay. I mean, it paid a lot more than teaching and the graduate department there at Arkansas. So I just kept coming back. And so I wasn't researching Sandy and Wayne then, but I was living it and seeing how the highways were constructed and what was happening, and you know, really enjoying these characters, because these are real characters. The folks who build our highways are a very different set of human beings, and they're wonderful, and some despicable, and some conniving, and it's just an interesting set of people. And that's where that surveying came in. I'd witnessed a lot of this, but I'd never I hadn't come back to it for a long time. And then, you know what? I so admired the novella. It's such a nifty form. You know, it's what Andre Dubus called the after dinner novel. Just long enough that you could read it after dinner. Now, maybe you have really short dinners, or you ate really early. I can't read as fast as he does. But I really wanted to write that, but I wanted it to be like a country song. You know, Miller Williams used to say to us, there may be no higher calling in the world than writing a good country music song. And I thought, what does he mean by that? And finally I began to learn, and I kind of turned those two things together with Sandy and Wayne. I wanted it to be two people who can't be together, who really better not be together. It'd be the worst thing in the world for them to be together, but they just can't help it. And so that's how I wrote it.
Do you find writing longer full-length novels, is that harder, or is writing a novella harder than writing a full-length novel, or is it about the same thought process, or do you take a plot and then you sort of minimize it down or shrink it down to fit into a novella form?
Oh gosh, I wish I were that calculating. That would be great. You know, I write along, Tim, and I'd say probably after I published The Teeth of the Souls, I sort of had a feeling, okay, the pace of this stuff feels like a novel, so I'm in for a long haul. Here we go. But otherwise, and I really enjoy writing short stories a lot, and that's what was in Some Kinds of Love, that book that won the Juniper Prize from the University of Massachusetts Press. But you'll write along in short story, and all of a sudden it gets a little heavier, gets a little longer, and you've got to step back and say, all right, is this going to be a novella? Because a novella is really dangerous territory. They're so hard to sell. They're really, really hard to sell, because a big publisher says, well, I don't want novella, I want novel. And magazines say, well, I don't want novella, I want a short story. And yet some of the most amazing works of literature have been novellas. You know, when you think of Bartleby the Scrivener, or Station Master Falmerayer by Joseph Roth, there's such beautiful novellas, there's so many by Alice Munro that are just spectacular. And yet, unless you're Alice Munro, they're just really hard to sell. It's hard for people to package them. So I was so delighted that this one got its day.
And it won the Knickerbocker Prize, is that right?
It did. Yeah, in 2013, it won the Knickerbocker Prize from a place called Big Fiction. And what a brave bunch they were. What they did was create a letterpress magazine with beautiful French folds and tapered edges, just beautiful. And they would publish one or two novellas in each issue. And so it won the Knickerbocker Prize, and to my delight, it was chosen by Lauren Groff just before President Obama raised up her novel Fates and Furies as, you know, the book he was reading that summer.
Mm-hmm.
So that I've always been really, really delighted and humbled by that. She's an amazing writer, and she chose it for the Knickerbocker. And then a little crazy place called Dock Street Press in Seattle decided to bring it out in book form, and that went along nicely for a while. And then that little press just couldn't keep going. And my wife and I said, you know what? Well, especially my wife, this book is my wife's doing. She just couldn't stand it that a book was going out of print. And that had never happened to me yet in my writing career. And I thought, you know, should I explain to Tammy that this happens to everybody? But she just wouldn't let go and said, you know, we know how to do this. We could probably publish this book. Let's package it. Let's make it beautiful and make it stay forever. And so I said, well, if we do that, we'll just release it on our anniversary date. So it's got November 16th, 2020 for the rest of its little life as our anniversary date. So we did it. So I guess it's technically been published 3 times.
That's great. That's great. Are you working on something now? I know you're Morgan's Quarry, and then The Teeth of the Souls is the sequel to Morgan's Quarry, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you working on something else in that series, or is that series finished, and you're working on something else?
I'm working on something else right now that I've really had a ball with. I mean, it seems like almost everybody was in a garage band at some time in their life, right? Everybody wanted to be a rock and roll star at least once. And I had that bug in me, but I've also been really captivated by people who could sing exceptionally well, and I thought, what if I write about a young person who's just way outsized talented for Springfield, Missouri, and yet because she's in the Ozarks, she's got that extra struggle. How in the world can I reach the big polarities of what American culture or production, New York and LA, right? How am I ever going to get that attention? And you see somebody like Billie Eilish explode into the world's consciousness, and then you read her background, and think, oh, mom was an actor and dad was a record executive or something like that. And so I wanted to try that. And write about 3 friends growing up in Springfield right now. And that's been a delight and challenge, and that's what I've been drafting on.
It's interesting that you mentioned garage bands. When Tom and I were at the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies at the Central Arkansas Library System here in Little Rock, we had a music conference, and we showcased some garage bands from Little Rock. In the 1960s? 60s. And we actually produced a CD of all these garage bands. There's the Culls and the Coachmen and all this. It was great fun. And they, it was so amazing when these 2 bands, the Culls and the Coachmen, I think, reunited for this music festival, and how many people turned out to see their concert, and how many people had remembered them as garage bands growing up and how happy they were that they were reunited and had this concert going on.
It's
What a
really-
rewarding
even though it might have been 40 years earlier.
Right. It was like 40 years earlier, but it was so great.
That's great.
I need to
Well,
send you a copy of that CD.
You should. Well, Little Rock has a great music scene. I wish I could remember the name of this band, but they would come to Fayetteville in the period from 1994 to 98 that I was there. Well, really 1990 to 1998. They were from Little Rock, and the lead singer played just this tremendous big hollow body Gibson. He looked a little bit like Elvis Costello, but oh my stars, they were good. I can see them and see their set and how they played, but I just cannot for the life of me remember who they are. They had a name sort of like the Smithereens or something, but that's of course not who they were. But boy, they were tight, and Little Rock just really, knocked you out every time they came.
Little Rock has had some really good bands, really good local bands. And I wish I could think of the one that you're thinking of. I kind of sort of visualize them in my mind, and I can't recall their name, the band name either.
Well, I'll shoot a note to my friend Randolph Thomas, who played in Jackson's Buick and a lot of bands around Fayetteville, because he had an encyclopedic memory for every band that ever appeared at JR's Lightbulb Club.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really great at music encyclopedia.
Well, there's an individual here, Bill Jones, here in Little Rock, who is the same type of person, and he can relate and spout out all these facts about songs and local bands and on the labels they were on and everything like that. And he actually helped with that CD that I mentioned earlier.
Now, wasn't there another band about that time from Little Rock called Pumpkinhead? Do you remember Pumpkinhead and New South Soul?
I vaguely remember Pumpkinhead.
Ooh, they were great, horns and everything, and they played soul music, just ripped it up. And their lead singer did, unfortunately for the young man, he did look kind of like a pumpkinhead. He looked like a jack-o'-lantern. But man, oh man, were they super duper. I could swear they were from Little Rock too, Pumpkinhead.
And I think there was a band called Babyface Ashtray. That
Well, of course.
That might have been the title of their album. I'm not sure, but and of course the band Evanescence came from Little Rock. In the early 2000s. You remember Evanescence?
Oh, I do kind of. Okay, wow.
Amy Lee was the lead singer of that.
Okay, wow.
Well, we're just sort of shooting in the dark here. Actually, there's a huge history of music in Little Rock and Arkansas in general, and we need to do a program on that.
We do need to do a program on that.
Program, and University of Arkansas Press needs to publish a book. I could see one called Punk Arkansas and one called Garage Band Arkansas. That'd be a blast. And I mean, any book to reveal that other side of myself. Any book that puts a lot of proper names in the index, that's going to sell. That's just old newspaper man stuff, right? Put as many proper names in the newspaper every morning and you'll sell newspapers.
I'm trying to looking at the sort of the comments, and someone mentioned new books, mystery novels with the strong Arkansas and Little Rock locations by Joe David Rice. He has a new novel out.
Joe David Rice has a novel?
Yes.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Joe David is the retired longtime director of the state tourism office. A great guy, a good writer. He wrote 2 or 3 books of nonfiction. I did not know he was working on fiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that would make a great Christmas gift too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tim is making a public hint here as to, I need to buy him a copy of this novel as soon as it comes out. Tim knows that I do not collect Arkansas fiction. I collect Arkansas nonfiction. And you see in the background back here, just a tiny, actually it's less than half of his Arkansas collection. And the wall that I'm looking at is all fiction. And it is huge.
That's great.
There's been lots of books written, lots of novels written in Arkansas.
Do I see on the shelf right between you John Gould Fletcher's Arkansas?
That's nonfiction back behind me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. But John, well, now are you disparaging John Gould Fletcher's great book, Arkansas?
Well,
You recall
no,
that?
but let me just say that I think you have to understand where John Gould Fletcher was coming from. You know, he was from the aristocracy. He was, well, he was mentally ill for one thing, but he was also, John Gould Fletcher was one of those people who could not write without bringing his opinions and his political agenda and other sorts of things into his writings. Arkansas is really quite a dated book now. Published in 1948, I think.
47.
47. And by dated, I don't mean just that it's 70 some odd years old. I mean that it's the interpretation is pretty reactionary.
Oh,
John Gould
sure.
Fletcher himself went through a phase, you know, where he was pretty reactionary. He signed on to that. What was the name of that manifesto?
Southern Manifesto.
Right.
Yeah.
And previously had been an imagist.
Had been a
So,
what?
An imagist.
Yeah, he was important
all
in the
the
images.
Yeah, he tutored around with Pound and all those other people who were over there in Paris and wrote real brief little imagist poems that were never as successful as you know, Pound's Petals on a Wet Black Bough. His images of faces in a metro, nothing like that. But I always found that John Gould Fletcher would have loved to have found his club, but never ever found the club that he could really join. That's but a fascinating character. You know, I'm so glad we're talking about him on Zoom.
I think John Gould Fletcher would make a great lead character in a novel.
Maybe I think you know, you would need. I'm trying to remember the really difficult, dangerous actor who did play a great Bartleby the Scrivener, Christian. What's his last name? He was the one who tried to body kick David Letterman a million years ago. We haven't seen anything from him in heaven knows how long.
Christian Bale? It's not Christian Bale, is it?
I don't think that's right. If my wife were here, she'd tell me in an instant. But it would take someone that intense, to my mind, to play John Gould Fletcher. I really do think, you know, it would take a very intense actor to pull it off so that people will watch it, right? Because otherwise, you know, you're just watching a movie about a pistol, a difficult man.
Well, you know, the great antagonist for him was his mental state, and that could make a novel really, really. It could open avenues of interpretation for him that might not be there for someone who didn't suffer from mental illness. And then, of course, there's the suicide at the end, which,
Yes.
you know, would be an interesting thing. But who would play Charlie Mae Simon?
Oh,
His wife, a woman who seems to me to have been so different from John Gould Fletcher. You know, the epitome of mental stability, for one thing, very sound, solid, and children's literature writer.
yes, that's
Quite
right.
attractive. Really, she was attractive in her younger years. I can't see, you know, when they were having an affair, John Gould Fletcher and Charlie Mae Simon, before she was divorced, he was living in Little Rock and she was living in Memphis, I think, and they would have rendezvous in Forest City, which is hard for
In
me.
Forest City. Okay.
Anyhow, he's a fascinating man, and he would make the subject of a very good, well done film.
Crispin Glover. Crispin Glover, not Christian. Crispin Glover. I was busy Googling who almost kicked David Letterman. I knew that's the way to get something on Google. Pull up
So there's
something.
a list of people who've kicked David Letterman.
Well, apparently there's only one, and that's I was watching that interview, I remember, and Crispin Glover was going to demonstrate that, and David Letterman said, sure, demonstrate, and backed away from the camera, and then suddenly commercial. Huh. And then Crispin Glover was no longer on set with David Letterman.
Crispin Glover's an odd person. He's a really odd person. But
Don't you think? And he'd make a fantastic John Gould.
he would actually. Now that you say that, I mentioned him. He would make a great.
I don't know who
John
he is.
Gould Fletcher.
You're going to have to Google him. And actually, watching his Bartleby the Scrivener was superb. It was absolutely superb. There was nothing maudlin about it. There was nothing exploitive about it. You got every sense that that this person had walked into a Scrivener's operation and was deeply mentally ill, and no one there knew what to do with someone who said, "I prefer none." And what a great performance, and what a great novella. God, I reread that every year.
Hey, Steve, we're running out of time, but how can people order copies of your books?
What I tell people to do first is look to their independent bookstores, and Pagination Bookshop in Springfield, Missouri has copies of it, and I think the new Pearls in Fayetteville has copies of it. And check out bookshop.org. Bookshop.org lets you bypass the evil behemoth that is Amazon.com. And part of what you spend at bookshop.org goes to independent bookstores every single month in a really dynamic and interesting payment structure. So some bookstores who are just starting out, like Pagination and Pearls and others, they've adopted bookshop.org as their driving website. As the architecture that helps them do that. So look straight to those places. Happily, it is an audio book. That's an exciting thing. Some people like an audio book, and it's really interesting to have somebody read the book and do that. And then it's also available as an ebook as well.
Which title is this?
Oh, it's Sandy and Wayne.
Okay.
Yeah. And The Legend of the Albino Farm is also that way. That was a book set up here in Springfield, Missouri. Talk about a Halloween book. That's a very good Halloween book set about a spooky legend up here in Springfield.
Well, this has been great, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we cut out, I want to remind people about our email. It's the letters T and T for Tom and Tim, the word with, and then TAT. So TT with TAT at gmail.com. So we hope that people will shoot us an email. Steve, thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed having you. And we look forward to talking with you again sometime in the future. And we look forward to having people back on November 18th, which will be our next Third Thursday show.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.